In keeping with Roman tradition, Augustus chose his stepson Tiberius as his successor, making Tiberius the second emperor of Rome in 14 CE. However, the ancient historians didn't look back on Tiberius's reign with much warmth, often comparing him unfavorably to Augustus. They painted him as a reluctant ruler, someone who seemed to have no desire for power and would have preferred to be anywhere else. This is particularly striking considering how many ambitious Romans in later centuries were willing to do anything to wear the imperial crown. So why was Tiberius so hesitant to embrace the role that so many would have killed for? Tiberius wasn't born into the imperial family like Gaius Caligula or Commodus. In fact, he came into the world on November 16, 42 BCE, at a time when the future of Rome as an empire wasn't even on anyone's radar yet. He wasn't connected to Julius Caesar or his grandnephew, Gaius Octavius Caesar. Instead, Tiberius was the son of Tiberius Claudius Nero, a Roman senator from a prominent patrician family who had served Julius Caesar, and Livia Drusilla, another aristocrat. During the civil war following Caesar's assassination, Tiberius's father aligned himself with Mark Antony and took his family along in 41 BCE. But after just 3 years, he switched sides and returned to Rome. Upon their arrival, Octavius met Livia and instantly fell for her, despite still being married to Scribonia, whom he quickly divorced the day she gave birth to their daughter Julia. Octavius even convinced Tiberius's father to divorce his pregnant wife, and soon after, Livia gave birth to her second son, Nero Claudius Drusus, at the end of 38 BCE. By early 37 BCE, Livia married Octavius, who would later become Augustus, and both Tiberius and Drusus were raised in his household, setting the stage for Tiberius's future within the imperial family. Tiberius and Drusus were trained to become senators and generals, but it's unlikely that anyone told them they were destined for the throne. Livia likely had hopes of bearing Augustus's biological heirs, but that never came to fruition. Augustus, for his part, also had expectations for his daughter Julia to provide him with grandsons, and she did, through her marriage to Augustus's close friend, Marcus Agrippa. They had 3 sons, Gaius, Lucius Caesar, and Agrippa Postumus, and 2 daughters, Julia and Agrippina. However, Augustus seemed to prioritize his direct bloodline over the sons of Livia and showed a clear favoritism towards his own biological family. In an effort to secure the succession, Augustus initially adopted Marcus Claudius Marcellus, the son of his sister Octavia, who was born in the same year as Tiberius. Augustus arranged for Marcellus to marry his daughter Julia in 25 BCE. However, Marcellus's life was cut short when he died from an illness in 23 BCE. He became the first member of the imperial family to be interred in the mausoleum of Augustus. In 21 BCE, Augustus arranged for his trusted ally Agrippa to divorce his wife and marry his daughter Julia, essentially naming him as his potential successor. This decision highlighted Augustus's preference for loyalty, friendship, and competence over family ties. By this time, Augustus had suffered from the same illness that claimed Marcellus's life in 23 BCE, making him acutely aware of his own mortality. He granted Agrippa powers nearly equivalent to his own, including proconsular imperium for provincial command and tribunicia potestas for authority within Rome. Agrippa was entrusted with overseeing the eastern provinces. Unfortunately, Agrippa passed away during a military campaign in 12 BCE. Though he had his own mausoleum, he was buried in Augustus's mausoleum, cementing his place in the imperial legacy. Augustus then focused on his grandsons, Gaius and Lucius Caesar, the sons of Julia and Agrippa, born in 20 and 17 BCE. From a young age, they were groomed for leadership, rapidly advancing through the traditional political and military ranks, Both were appointed princeps iuventutis, a title that signified their status as heirs. According to Tacitus, Augustus was determined to push them into positions of power quickly. Gaius was given a military command in the eastern provinces in 1 BCE and was made consul at only 19 years old in 1 CE. Meanwhile, Lucius was set to become consul upon reaching 19, with special powers to consecrate buildings in Rome. He was also sent to Hispania for military training, but tragically passed away from illness in 2 CE. 2 years later, Gaius died from the same fate in 4 CE. Once again, Augustus's succession plans were dashed. By 4 CE, Augustus was well into his 60s, and the issue of succession had become urgent. His daughter Julia and her late husband Agrippa had another son, Agrippa Postumus, whom Augustus adopted. However, Augustus seems to have doubted that the 16-year-old was ready for the immense responsibilities his older grandsons had faced. Instead, he turned to Tiberius, Livia's son, who had more experience and was older, adopting him as his primary heir. Before Tiberius withdrew from the public eye, Augustus had certainly kept him and his brother Drusus in the loop, so to speak, through an accelerated rise in their careers. By the age of 29, Tiberius had already become consul in 13 BCE, outpacing even the usual minimum age. He had been busy with military exploits from the get-go, first in the east, where he helped recover the standards lost by Crassus in the disastrous Parthian campaign. Then, alongside his brother Drusus, he conquered Rhaetia and had a hand in campaigns along the Danube and Rhine, solidifying his reputation as one of Rome's premier generals. But then came the matter of his marriage. After Agrippa's death, Tiberius was coerced into divorcing his first wife, Vespania, daughter of Agrippa, to marry Julia, Augustus's daughter. Now, it's safe to say Tiberius wasn't exactly thrilled with this arrangement, especially since he had a real affection for Vespania and was less than impressed with Julia's notorious behavior. He soldiered on, of course, but things were starting to look a little complicated. In 6 BCE, after the tragic death of his brother Drusus and another stint as consul, Tiberius was handed yet another major responsibility: command in the east. But in a move that raised many eyebrows, the 36-year-old general suddenly announced that he would be retiring to Rhodes. Now, this wasn't exactly what you would call business as usual in Roman politics, where people did not simply give up power like a bad hand of cards. Tacitus and others speculate it was his unhappy marriage that drove him to this decision, though it seems a bit too neat and tidy an explanation. Suetonius adds that Augustus pleaded with him to stay. He was the emperor. More likely he made his plans clear and told Tiberius to step aside for the younger Gaius and Lucius, who were now of age and starting to come into their own. Tiberius, ever the enigmatic figure, might have been given an ultimatum, or perhaps he simply saw the writing on the wall and decided to retire before things got any messier. The official excuse, to avoid suspicion of rivalry with Gaius and Lucius, sounds like a well-phrased diplomatic cover-up, doesn't it? Either way, Augustus probably knew it was time to shift his focus elsewhere. While Tiberius had been honored with a vast array of powers, Augustus never made the formal step of adopting him. It was as if Tiberius had been handed the imperial keys without the official title to match. Perhaps Augustus, with his impeccable sense of timing, was already more focused on the younger generation. Whether Tiberius was willingly sidelined or whether Augustus nudged him out for the good of the family tree, the decision for Tiberius to retire was made. The aging emperor must have thought, why deal with all these ambitious men when the young ones are practically begging to take over? And so, with a sharp sigh and a possibly bitter farewell, Tiberius made his way to Rhodes, perhaps thinking that some quiet time by the sea was exactly what the doctor ordered. Or maybe he just needed a break from the family drama. When Gaius Caesar passed away in 4 CE, Augustus found himself with limited choices for a successor. To ensure a line of succession, he adopted both Agrippa Postumus and Tiberius. While Tiberius accepted this new role and returned to Rome, it was clear that he wasn't Augustus's first pick for emperor. One of the conditions of his adoption was that he in turn adopt Germanicus, the son of Tiberius's brother Drusus and Augustus's niece, Antonia Minor, despite having his own grown son. This move further cemented the notion that Tiberius was meant to serve as a temporary placeholder rather than the primary heir. By 6 CE, Tiberius, now the official heir, was dispatched to Illyricum to manage an uprising. When the need for more troops arose, Augustus sent Germanicus to assist in the campaign, not Agrippa Postumus. This was a clear signal from Augustus, who had by then concluded that Agrippa Postumus was ill-suited for leadership, violent, reckless, and lacking the necessary temperament. As a result, Postumus was disowned and exiled, leaving Tiberius as the primary heir, though still under the shadow of Augustus's expectations and conditions. Tiberius, now fully in the emperor-in-waiting role, worked alongside Augustus, shouldering many of the responsibilities. Between 10 and 12 CE, he led campaigns in Germania, earning a modest triumph upon his return to Rome in 12 CE. In 13 CE, Tiberius held all the same powers as Augustus, effectively co-ruling the empire. When Augustus passed away in 14 CE at the age of 75, Tiberius, now 55, seamlessly ascended to the throne. His journey had been long, but the groundwork for his rule had been firmly established. Historical accounts often point to Livia's alleged role in securing power for her son Tiberius, with some suggesting she orchestrated key events to eliminate rivals. She has been accused of involvement in the deaths of Gaius and Lucius, as well as playing a role in Agrippa Postumus's exile. However, such claims seem more rooted in the routine vilification of influential imperial women than in solid evidence. These allegations align with a broader tendency in ancient sources to portray powerful women as scheming manipulators rather than recognize them as capable political actors. If Livia indeed had ambitions to see Tiberius succeed Augustus, her efforts don't appear particularly effective. It took over 4 decades for Augustus to finally adopt Tiberius, hardly the work of a master strategist. Furthermore, despite her supposed influence, she was unable to prevent Tiberius from retreating to Rhodes at a critical juncture in his political career, a decision that significantly delayed his path to power. It's reasonable to believe that Livia, like many mothers, may have advocated for her son and highlighted his strengths to Augustus. However, the notion that she was a calculating and ruthless figure, orchestrating murders and political maneuvering to secure Tiberius's position, doesn't align well with the available evidence. It seems more plausible that her influence was substantial, yet far from the malevolent and all-powerful force described by her detractors. Historical accounts suggest that Augustus left Tiberius with a detailed roadmap for governing the empire, which extended well beyond designating Germanicus as his successor. Among the guidance attributed to Augustus was a firm directive not to expand the empire's borders further, a reflection of his belief in maintaining stability over pursuing risky conquests. It's also likely that Augustus orchestrated plans for his own deification, ensuring Tiberius would oversee the process, and advised him on cultivating an image of modesty by refusing excessive titles and honors. This approach, rooted in presenting himself as the first among equals, had been a cornerstone of Augustus's political strategy, allowing him to consolidate power without overtly flaunting it. However, the Rome Tiberius inherited was vastly different from the one Augustus had shaped in the early days of the Principate. Despite following Augustus's example and rejecting titles such as Pater Patriae and the civic crown, Tiberius's attempts to appear humble often backfired. Instead of being lauded for modesty, he was perceived as an unwilling leader, disconnected and insincere. Tiberius's decision to promote Senate involvement also had unintended consequences. While he may have hoped to encourage genuine senatorial independence, his reluctance to assert clear authority created uncertainty. The Senate, unsure of his true intentions, became anxious and overly cautious, often trying to anticipate his desires rather than exercising their own judgment. This dynamic strained the relationship between Tiberius and the Senate, fostering distrust and contributing to the notorious treason trials that defined much of his rule. Far from cultivating goodwill, these actions cemented Tiberius's reputation as an aloof and deeply unpopular ruler. Tiberius maintained Augustus's practice of careful succession planning. He adhered to Augustus's wishes by adopting Germanicus as his heir, a move that reflected both continuity and deference to the late emperor's strategy. When Augustus died, Germanicus briefly became the focus of a potential challenge to Tiberius's rule, as some German troops tried to declare him emperor. Germanicus, however, refused this opportunity and pledged his loyalty to Tiberius. Tiberius, in turn, publicly promoted Germanicus as his successor. In 17 CE, Germanicus was celebrated in Rome with a grand triumph, one that dwarfed any of Tiberius's own. The following year, he was entrusted with command over the empire's eastern provinces, a responsibility once shared by figures like Agrippa and Tiberius himself. Tragically, Germanicus died in 19 CE, leaving Tiberius to reconsider his plans. Attention shifted to his biological son Drusus, who was elevated as a potential heir and began sharing tribunician power with Tiberius in 22 CE. However, Drusus's death the next year derailed those plans. Tiberius then turned to Germanicus's surviving sons, Nero, Drusus, and the young Gaius, later known as Caligula. In 23 CE, Tiberius adopted the two elder boys as his heirs, solidifying their status within the imperial lineage. In 27 CE, Tiberius effectively removed himself from Rome's daily affairs by retreating to Capri. From there, he governed remotely, placing significant trust in key figures like his mother Livia, the Praetorian prefect Sejanus, and his chosen heirs to manage the empire. This delegation of power proved disastrous. After Livia's death in 29 CE, Sejanus exploited his growing influence to consolidate power. Using treason trials as a political weapon, he orchestrated the exile of Germanicus's widow Agrippina and her two eldest sons in 30 CE, accusing them of plotting against Tiberius. They eventually died in exile, leaving Tiberius disillusioned and bereft of heirs. The following year, Tiberius moved decisively, arresting and executing Sejanus for his overreach and betrayal. By 33 CE, Tiberius turned to the youngest surviving members of the dynasty to secure the line of succession. He adopted Gaius Caligula, Germanicus's popular and charismatic son, and Tiberius Gemellus, the young son of his late son Drusus. The two boys were summoned to Capri in 35 CE, where Tiberius personally oversaw their preparation for future leadership. When Tiberius died in 37 CE, Caligula, as the elder and more favored of the two, ascended to the throne. To secure his position, Caligula eliminated Gemellus, eliminating any potential challenge to his authority. Tiberius spent the final decade of his reign on the island of Capri, far removed from the heart of Roman political life, but his reasons for doing so remain shrouded in mystery. Unlike Marcus Aurelius, who left behind a record of his reflections and meditations, Tiberius left no personal accounts to offer insight into his thoughts or motivations. Historians are left to speculate, relying on sources that paint an unflattering and often contradictory picture of the emperor's later years. Some accounts suggest that Tiberius retreated to Capri to escape the political strife and personal betrayals that had defined much of his life. His contentious relationship with the Senate, the disintegration of his family through death and exile, and the treachery of his once trusted ally, Sejanus, may have driven him to seek solace away from Rome. This narrative portrays a ruler disillusioned by court politics and weary of the demands of imperial rule. Other sources, however, delve into lurid allegations, accusing Tiberius of transforming Capri into a decadent haven. They describe his villa adorned with explicit artwork, hosting wild orgies, and indulging in debauchery. Among the most damning accusations are claims of sexual abuse, including acts of pedophilia and sacrificial rituals involving young boys, charges that are as sensational as they are unsubstantiated. These stories originate from later historians who neither lived during Tiberius's time nor witnessed his behavior, raising questions about their credibility. Similar tales were often circulated about unpopular emperors, likely reflecting the fears and gossip of the Roman elite rather than objective truths. It is easy to imagine disgruntled senators speculating about what the emperor was doing on his secluded island, projecting their anxieties and frustrations onto a ruler they already disliked. Whether Tiberius sought peace, became reclusive out of bitterness, or was indeed guilty of excesses on Capri is something we may never fully understand. The truth about his motives and actions remains as elusive as the man himself. It is clear that Tiberius was never originally intended to rule as emperor. Unlike others in Augustus's orbit, he had no direct connection to Julius Caesar, and his father had initially aligned with the losing faction during the chaotic wars that marked the Republic's transition to empire. Tiberius only found himself near the center of imperial power because of Augustus's deep admiration for his mother, Livia. Raised within the imperial household, Tiberius was groomed as a general and statesman, preparing him for roles of significant responsibility, but not for the ultimate position of emperor. Augustus's decisions throughout his reign made it evident that Tiberius was, at best, a contingency plan. He was initially sidelined, later positioned as a caretaker for heirs with stronger Julian bloodlines, and finally, an option of last resort. Even his eventual adoption as Augustus's heir came with the stipulation that he prioritize members of the Julio-Claudian lineage over his own son, a condition that highlighted his secondary status in the eyes of the imperial system. Rather than fueling ambition or a thirst for dominance, this treatment seems to have left Tiberius indifferent to the idea of ruling. He accepted the role only when it became unavoidable, fulfilling the responsibilities laid before him, but never embracing them with enthusiasm. Tiberius appeared acutely aware that the empire was never truly meant to be his, and this knowledge seemed to shape his reign as one of reluctant duty rather than eager leadership.